Hi everyone, I'm Kalpana Singhal, founder and CEO of Techplus Media, and I'm excited to welcome all of you to this very interesting fireside chat on topic the tectonic shift of capital towards innovative and sustainable future. The last few years have been the tipping point for startup activity globally and in India particularly. In financial year 2022, the Indian startup ecosystem recorded approximately 1,600 funding deals, which was 16% higher than the financial year 2021. The fiscal gone by will also be historic as it recorded the elevation of 54 startups into the unicorn club. So, this discussion will deliberate on how companies are keeping up with the requirements to create a sustainable business environment and promoting innovations aimed at satisfying the demand for lower carbon technologies and more sustainable products, as well as rebuilding supply chains towards more circular practices. We have very special guests, Mr. Amit Mookim, President, Time Mumbai, and Ms. Priyanka Nishar, Founder and Managing Director, Azent Overseas Education, as our guests to take this discussion forward. A very warm welcome to both of you, Amit and Priyanka.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so in the context to our today's topic, Amit, we will love to know your views and your observations when it comes to like how has the pandemic impacted the funding ecosystem and availability of capital?
Yeah. So first of all, Kalpana, Priyanka, it's such a pleasure to have this conversation. And Kalpana, it's very timely as well. You know, you raised an important question on how the availability of capital, has changed. And we've seen almost like a curve, right? Last year was, we were at a high, whether it was public markets, whether it was private capital, and some of the priorities of investments had also shifted. But this year, I think we've seen a bit of a sense check that has taken place. If I recall a report I was reading by Traxon Technologies, in Q1, we had close to $10 billion of funding that went into venture funds, right? Capital and startups. This has fallen by almost 33% in Q2. Part of it is, of course, the changed market environment. But I think we will need to take cognizance that the capital flows have indeed shifted over the last few quarters, and the way investments were being looked at has undergone a mindset shift as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Priyanka, what are your views on saying how you find that pandemic impacted the funding ecosystem and the availability of capital?
Looking back at the pandemic, so not talking about the current environment, but looking back over the last 2 years, digital businesses experienced a boom, right? There was nearly like 10 years of growth equivalent in a 2-year period because tech adoption was pervasive across age groups, across gender, across economic strata. And in this backdrop, there was this huge rush of funding availability, particularly for digital startups. Now, India was a big beneficiary of that trend, because of our population, our demographic advantage, affordable internet. And so it became one of the biggest receivers of funding in the world. It was inevitable then that there would be, as Amit mentioned, some rationalization of this. It was inevitable that at some point then people would take a step back and say, the growth that we projected over the last 2 years, are we still going to see that pace of growth over the next few years? And that is where the rationalization is happening now.
Yeah, absolutely. So the COVID-19, as you rightly said, pandemic has changed the business and investment landscape irrevocably. And it's changing how people work and how consumers buy.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, of course, there is a tectonic shift of capital towards innovations and sustainable businesses. So, Amit, what are the elements which would define the upcoming startups and unicorns as well as successful organizations of the future? If you can throw some light.
I think the keyword in my mind, Kalpana, Priyanka, is sustainability. And I don't mean just sustainability in the way we talk about the ESG agenda, but I think it's sustainability across a few dimensions, right? We today are in a talent war, right? Whether we see capital being shifted or not shifted, I think the way India is being looked at as a base for talent has certainly shifted. And that is resulting, if you combine it with hybrid working environments, a challenge on creating sustainable cultures in organizations, right? With such high attrition, I think somewhere the penny will drop, especially as companies which are at a certain stage try and mature. What matures is the culture. What matures is how the teams align to the vision and the direction of the company. And if that is continuously shifting, I think it takes a huge pressure on growth, and it takes a huge pressure on what you build as a sustainable business. So that's one. I think the second thing, and Priyanka talked about it, right? I mean, there was this almost rush, right? There was a rush, and that rush has kind of settled a bit. So part of that is that, and part of it is, of course, whatever's happening in the environment around us, right? We've got geopolitical uncertainty. People are talking more and more about climate change. The aftermath of the pandemic is now coming out with respect to economic slowdown, and hence capital, the risk appetite against capital has become a little more prudent, which was bound to happen. Now, what does it mean for high growth organizations? Now, high growth organizations are really engines that are needing fuel to actually drive at a certain pace, right? Now, there was a time when capital would move to that engine to fuel it without seeing tracks beyond the 100 meters. But now I think the conversation is, do you have a 1 kilometer track in front of you instead of a 100-meter track, right? So that there is that thinking on, are you building more solid cash flows? Are you building more solid customer models? Are you building more solid products, right? And to me, that is also a maturity. I feel that even if some of these hadn't happened, the fact that the Indian startup ecosystem is maturing would have prompted these conversations to start happening. So that's the second part of sustainability. I think the third part of sustainability is, and again, it's, sometimes it's a frog in the boiling water syndrome, right? We don't realize as the water is boiling, and literally the water is boiling now. I can see it in the city I live in, and how the ecosystem and the pressures we face today are all a result of us having ignored some of these facts. And I think some of those will have to form the center stage agenda of not only large corporations or the government, but even growing organizations, because some of these organizations will have to factor in that mindset today to be able to push that tomorrow. So I think that's somewhere these are three huge pillars on which I think leaders of some of these growing unicorns and startups should allocate a little bit of their mind space to. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, Amit. Fairly, you have given few fair points, I would say rather. So, Priyanka, would you like to add to this? Because what I can construe is that what Amit said is that when it comes to sustainability, the innovation goes hands in sync with the sustainability. So, what are your views on this?
Absolutely. So, I agree with the points that Amit raised. And the way that I would say it is this. Over the last few years, we've been focusing as not just, the startups, but as an ecosystem on growth at any cost. So growth at all costs, growth at any cost. And there wasn't that inward focus within the company of, is my business sustainable? Is my business going to be profitable? Is there that customer centricity? Is there innovation, right? So the shift that is happening now, and with the uncertainty externally, is that I think startups have to start looking inward and looking at us. We have to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, how do I build an organization that is profitable, that is sustainable, where I put my customers first? We focus on innovation. It's also about back to fundamentals, right? Like getting our unit economics right, positive cash flows, productivity in all aspects of the business. And that is the core of the DNA of the systems that, of the organizations that we're working on building now. So I think my A summary of this would be a shift from external focus of like growth at any cost to building a sustainable, profitable business where the fundamentals make sense.
Right, absolutely. So the long-term sustainability requires disruption, which means changing the way you do business. Whether it requires innovation, which means developing of new products and services that are good for people, the planet, and profit. So none of that is possible without the right technology to digitalize all your business processes and store your data in the cloud. So, Amit, coming back to you, how are the innovations and sustainable business models impacting the investment decision making and capital allocations for investors and organizations?
Kalpana, I feel that there is that awareness that has started to happen. I think we still have a long way to go. We see that from an investment perspective, there are dedicated platforms that funds have started to create around these themes, and it's a very wide theme, right? I mean, when we talk about sustainability, there are elements of sustainability that are very directly identifiable, whether it's sustainable agriculture or sustainable fuel. But then there are elements of sustainability that are part of our lifestyle, and there is innovation that actually could happen in a current process, whether it's manufacturing or whether it's a delivery, that makes the process or the manufacturing more sustainable, right? So it's a movement. What is happening is at 2-3 levels, and I think we will see this open up in the next 4 to 5 years. Large corporations are realizing that they have to work through not only looking at it as a CSR initiative, but also their core businesses need to start looking at innovation and partnering with some of these innovators to bring in more sustainability led themes into what they are doing. So that is one. And I would see, you would have some of, that corporate capital, corporate ventures coming in and working with these. The second element is funds, right? I mean, there's a friend of mine who set up a fund just for plant-based food, right? And now that is something that's coming up in the West a lot. It has health benefits beyond anything else, but it's also sustainable, right? So we see themes around climate change, themes around renewable energy. Renewable energy was, of course, the first off the bat, but now you've got products, clothing, food. Some of these are now coming up as dedicated themes. These are still early stages because you still don't have large platforms, marketplaces that have got created because these products and services also come at a different cost structure, and the cost structure today is not comparable to standard processed foods and other things because of scale, right? So that awareness has to come in, which is why I think, Kalpana, when I started the point, it'll take time. I think directionally we're there. From Thai perspective, we have created a sustainability SIG, which is a community we are creating across the world because we believe that we need to foster this entrepreneurship. We need to mentor startups. We need to drive this. And I think that this can only happen. It will not happen just with innovation. I think it'll happen when you have large corporations, when you have certain regulatory frameworks that will drive and support sustainability. And these innovators that come in and then they are put within this ecosystem. I would draw a parallel from healthcare, right? Healthcare is a social sector. Now, if you look at the innovation that has happened, it's very easy to do consumer-driven innovation because there's a consumer who's paying. But when you start layering that model out into tier 2, tier 3 areas, into villages, into areas of lack of access, you need a very different mindset. You need longer-term capital. You need entrepreneurs who don't think just about building high value businesses and unlocking value, but who have to combine that unlocking of value with value of delivery, right? Very different models. I think that mindset has to come in sustainability, right? It's taken years for a sector like healthcare to even start that journey, and it's not even there. So that's where I would say we are. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Amit, for sharing that example. So, Priyanka, how would you relate it, when it comes to your sector, which is education?
I think we're moving from a world where sustainability was a department First there was no department, right? Then there was this introduction of the CSR department in organizations where there was one person in every company, and a company of, hundreds of thousands of people whose job it was to think about sustainability. We're moving from that world into a world where every business has a both moral responsibility, but also a huge economic opportunity from becoming sustainable. So we are now looking at sustainability as the core. So even in the education space, right? Whether, if you look at online delivery, or if you even simply look at like replacing air travel with Zoom meetings, you are already creating this huge stride towards sustainability, towards an impact on climate. So companies no longer are, just purely sustainable businesses. Like that is going to become the core of every business that we create going forward. Consumers are going to start, there's a shift that is happening where consumers will start voting with their wallets here and start going towards promoting sustainable businesses as well, because there is a value proposition that you're providing. If, for example, we went with, this is in the education counseling space, there happen to be a lot of physical in-person fairs that requires travel. There's a lot of paper exchange. We went totally paperless. We've gone to virtual fairs, and students love it. Our clients, they absolutely love it because they don't have to keep track of like so many different pieces of paper. You have everything you need on like your app, right? So that is now a value proposition as well. That is our differentiator as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as Priyanka rightly pointed out, Amit, as consumers and investors become more vigilant on organizations' environmental responsibilities, how are the businesses integrating environmental, social, and governance factors into their business model?
I think it started to happen, Kalpana. I can see it across organizations where they are implementing policies for reducing energy consumption, removing plastic, taking a more cognizant view of business travel, fuel consumption, some of those things, right? When I see some of the initiatives that are even happening within organizations around corporate social responsibility and diversity and inclusion, I see some of those things starting to happen. I mean, we see more and more emphasis on health, safety, and well-being. We see more emphasis on how we are trying to have a more inclusive environment. So I can see that shift taking place to a more responsible kind of thinking, whether it's driven through employees or it's driven on sustainability. And I think part of that shift happened because of the last 2 years that we spent. We realized that we can't ignore this. Part of this shift is happening because now it's over the top for us. Yeah,
sure. So, Priyanka, according to you, how are businesses leveraging technology to digitalize their processes and drive innovations and change the way they do business?
So, leveraging technology or digitizing processes is no longer something that is a choice. This is the fundamental value proposition of any business or organization now, right? Like this is necessary. And as you come in as a new entrant, particularly as a startup, the game changer here, even if you're not a tech company, like we have this, a habit of calling businesses like either education or edtech, financial or fintech, but everything now is propelled through technology, right? Like this is a tool that you use in order to drive innovation, in order to change the way you do business, to offer something to your customer. I can't think of a business now that you could run using no technology whatsoever. It is now a fabric of all businesses. So, in this new world that we're going in, I foresee this world where there is no longer, this differentiator between edtech and education, right? Like we are now starting this wave of edtech that is now going to take over the market. And all companies then will be at tech because you'll be using technology.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Amit, would you like to add something to this?
I think the age, right? We went through a whole industrial age revolution. We went through a service revolution. We are moving through an age of cognitive revolution, as we call it, right? And I think the framework in which we are starting to operate is a framework where technology sits and builds the ecosystems of how businesses are working together, right? It's no longer silos, which is what, if you look at edtech, when Priyanka is talking about education, and now education is no longer about printing a textbook and relaying the content of that textbook to a classroom of students. It's become way more. It's become way more in terms of how every student is actually, there's a huge deal of customization on the learning style, learning ability, and the content that is going in, right? And it's that shift has now forever taken place. You can't go back because the way in which now the experience of edtech is taking place is now embedded in education and learning styles, right? So that's happened now. Question becomes, now what do we do with this, right? And how do we build businesses around it? Now, what it does is that in a traditional model of education, you would have had somebody printing the textbooks and publishing it, somebody managing the school infrastructure, and a bunch of teachers coming in and teaching, and somebody bringing in the schools, right? The students. In an edtech model, you can have very well-defined platforms that can work across various schools and various businesses, right? So the business models have changed. Somebody can really, really become an expert at content. Somebody can really become an expert on learning modalities, right? Somebody can build communities. Somebody can bring in teachers from across the world, right? And then all of that can come together in different platforms and brands, right? So the entire model has changed. Today, I don't know where the phone I'm using is manufactured, right? But the experience is the same. And that's exactly what technology has done for us. And India has benefited. You see, India has benefited because the journey we took 20, 25 years ago on building a lot more service-oriented model around technology is now making us ready to support the world in this, right? And also not only support the world, but it brought in so much of economic growth that now we have businesses that can support domestic markets, right? And hence, now is the way when you have tech companies coming in India, using this huge base, but then going global, right? And that can happen only through technology.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how is the new generation of entrepreneurs and startups innovating with their business models and attracting mindshare of investors with sustainable practices?
So, like we've been, I think, like Amit and I have been talking about, it is in every aspect of our work now, right? So, if you even, we've talked a little bit about edtech, but take a quick look at a different industry. Who would have imagined a few years ago that you can do your whole income tax return in a matter of a few hours from your home, and that these filed income tax returns, they can get processed in a matter of a few hours, and then refunds can come in a matter of a few days. This is, every process around us is now starting to change, right? We are looking at optimization. We look at the old ways that we did things, and we can see now in everything we do a new, faster, more efficient way. And that innovation is not just in our business models, right? Like even governments are adopting digital initiatives now. There's e-governance initiatives, there's all sorts of initiatives. So this is now, you can no longer look at technology as a function, as a separate function, a group of people that sit in a room by themselves working on, some technology. It is now every aspect of our business as entrepreneurs, as startups, is looked at through the lens of how can we make this better? How can we do this faster? And that drive, that passion, that ownership, that's what I see in this generation of entrepreneurs and startups.
Yeah, absolutely. So, on a closing note, like I would like to have suggestions from both of you for the audience. Like, what are your suggestions for the entrepreneurs and business leaders to scale culture for innovation towards a sustainable future? If you can, both of you can share your views.
Priyanka, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. So, many times when we talk about innovation, we look at successful innovations, but you cannot truly innovate if you're not willing to take a risk, because not all of your innovations will work. So to build a culture of innovation in an organization, we have to build a culture of risk taking. We have to build a culture where it is okay to fail. And it is okay to try lots of different things, some of which will work, and then pick the ones that work and maximize those, right? So, from my point of view, my one piece of advice is let's build a culture of risk taking and let's reward risks in themselves, whether or not they work. And then let's maximize the initiatives that actually do work.
Yeah. So, Amit, what are your thoughts?
Kalpana, I think I congratulate everyone who takes on the journey of entrepreneurship, because it's a journey of a lot of courage and many times a lonely one. But then if you have the courage to take that journey, I think there are 2-3 things which I would then push the individual to also think about, right? One is, I think one should be very clear about the problem they're trying to solve. Many times, when we look at certain businesses, there's a lot of information and a lot of grammar around the size of the market and this and that, but very little clarity on the problem they're trying to solve. It's very important, because it's important for yourself, it's important for your direction, your people, your investors, for the community. Number one. I think number two is that you need the right people by your side, and you need to have people who are investing their careers in you, right? People who are coming in, and it's very, very important to build that core team, and it starts with the leader. We often focus a lot on our investors and our customers, but we don't focus on people. And that's been, again, my advice to many entrepreneurs, that do not ignore your people. Your people are what will grow your business, not just your customers and your investors. We go a lot after the first two. We think that, people are not as important. I think number two. Number three is, and I come from a Marwari background, Kalpana, so I'll say this, is that it's very important to understand where the money comes from, right? You have to have a very clear understanding of who is paying and whether they are paying and when it is coming. You can't have a black hole model, right? The black hole days are gone. You have to have very clear line of sight of how the engine will run. The engine cannot run on fuel of other people's money. The engine needs to run on your fuel as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely, Amit. So wonderful thoughts. And Priyanka has also highlighted some of the key things, like, the risk has to be also be taken when it comes to scaling up the business, whether it is, driving your business, considering your sustainability or the other, the environment or the social and the governance things. And thank you so much, Amit, that you have highlighted some of the valid points, which are around the right meaning of entrepreneurship, I would say, rather. So thank you so much to both of you. It was a pleasure to meet and exchange ideas with you, and thank you for sharing your sharp insights. I'm looking forward to similar kind of engagements with both of you in future as well.
Thank you, Kalpana, and Amit, thank you. It was such a pleasure talking to both of you.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, both of you.
For more updates from CXO TV, please like and subscribe to our channel.